Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the brilliant perspective of YouTuber Tom Scrileus, looking at a deeply relatable but honestly rarely talked about phenomenon. We're talking about the psychological toll of corporate life and this silent erosion of the self. So, let's just jump right into his profound analysis of what actually happens to us when the daily demands of work literally force us to become someone else entirely.
To really grasp the gravity of this, just think about this famous line from the talented Mr. Ripley. Scrileus actually cites this exact quote to validate a very quiet, almost taboo feeling that so many of us in the workforce share. There's this immense, totally unspoken pressure to fake an identity at work, right? Just to survive, just to succeed. Sometimes, faking being someone you admire or even just someone the company clearly values, well, it often feels way safer than being your true, authentic self.
And, that brings us to the absolute core question of our explainer today. Think about it. If you spend 40 hours a week, maybe way more, acting out a character, who exactly is the person in the mirror when that mask finally comes off? What actually remains of your genuine identity when the professional performance inevitably ends for the day? It's a pretty jarring question to ask yourself, isn't it?
Moving on to Section 1, the hologram effect. So, to understand the surface-level symptoms of this whole workplace dilemma, we really have to look at Scrileus's concept of selective existence. Basically, this is the act of actively suppressing your true thoughts and just offering up this sanitized, corporate-approved version of yourself. I mean, think about the very last time you sat in a meeting, nodding along, saying, "Oh yeah, great idea," while completely parking your actual concerns way out of sight. You're there, but only partially. The real you is completely hidden away, usually relegated to private little notebooks or just silent internal monologues.
And over time, living this selective existence leads to some pretty severe emotional dissociation. It creates what he calls the NPC sensation. Now, if you're a gamer, you know an NPC is a non-playable character, basically a background character just repeating the same pre-programmed lines. When you suppress your true thoughts for long enough, you literally start to feel like a hologram. Sure, you become highly functional, but you aren't quite real. You're just executing an act that's so rehearsed you're running the whole thing on pure autopilot.
All right, Section 2. Faking the extrovert ideal. So why do so many workers, especially introverts, feel practically forced to wear this heavy psychological mask day in and day out? Well, the root cause is something called the extrovert ideal. Drawing on the fantastic work of Susan Cain, Scrileus points out that the modern workplace simply isn't a neutral environment. Not at all. It's actually a system specifically designed to reward people who are constantly social, super quick to speak up, and, performatively enthusiastic. If you happen to struggle in that kind of setting, listen, it is absolutely not a personal failing. It is a massive systemic environmental mismatch.
You can really clearly see this mismatch when you just contrast these two states. Take the introvert's reality. They thrive in calm environments, they need deep processing time, and they crave solitary focus. Now look at the modern corporate demand. Constant availability, the chaotic noise of open-plan offices, the constant pressure to speak first, and of course, faking all that enthusiasm. Frankly, to an introvert, the modern workplace functions almost like a sensory torture chamber.
Because of this, the really crucial point here is understanding the very specific type of exhaustion this creates. When you come home completely wiped out, literally collapsing onto the couch, you are rarely just tired from the actual labor itself. No, you're drained by the continuous performance. You're exhausted from managing constant sensory overstimulation and from actively suppressing your own natural nervous system all day. It means you aren't lacking a work ethic. You are just paying the immense heavy emotional cost of pretending to be someone else.
This takes us to Section 3, Observer, Driver, and Passenger.
To really see how this fractures the human mind, Scrileus provides this incredible, concrete framework, basically breaking our mental state down into 3 distinct entities. So, I want you to imagine your mind as a taxi. Your physical body, that's the taxi itself, just physically carrying you through the workplace. Inside, you've got 2 entities. First, there's the driver. This is your active, performing mind. It generates the ideas, it's chatty, but man, it's also incredibly anxious and harsh. It's constantly reminding you to perform and just survive. But then, sitting quietly in the back is the passenger. This is the observer. This is your true, authentic self. The passenger is empathetic, compassionate, and fundamentally just desires peace and a relaxed state. But here is exactly what happens in a high-pressure corporate environment. To survive that daily 9-to-5 grind, the anxious driver aggressively takes the wheel.
Meanwhile, your true, authentic self, the passenger, gets shoved to the back and is forced to just silently endure the ride. All of the passenger's needs for quiet, for real authenticity, completely suppressed. And over time, living purely as that anxious driver slowly but absolutely surely erodes a person's core self-esteem.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, the Avatar Dilemma.
This whole dynamic builds toward a pretty terrifying threshold, honestly. Like, what happens when this psychological mask stops being something you can just easily take off at 5 p.m.? If you follow the timeline of this erosion, it's eye-opening. Day 1, okay, you adopt the mask just to survive the new job. But by year 1, the system actually rewards you for it. You get promotions, you get praise. By year 5, though, you start noticing that the performance is bleeding into your personal life. You're suddenly monitoring your image even when you're completely alone. And by year 10, you reach total emotional dissociation. Sure, you've achieved the big title, but inside, you feel incredibly hollow.
This brings us to a genuinely chilling realization noted by Scrilius. He says, the mask becomes so fused to your face, you can't remember what you look like without it. Now, people talk about imposter syndrome all the time, usually framing it as this totally irrational fear. But in this specific case, the imposter syndrome is actually entirely rational. Think about it. When your entire career success is built on a fake persona, of course the real you feels like an absolute imposter. The real you didn't earn any of those rewards. Your corporate avatar did.
And that leads to the real tragedy here. The danger of becoming historically insignificant to yourself. Remember those private notebooks we were talking about earlier? When you constantly lock away your genuine thoughts, your real opinions, your authentic, messy reactions, you're essentially scrubbing your genuine experience right out of the record of your own life. When you eventually leave that job, your professional record is just wiped clean. If you never actually expressed your true self while you were there, your actual human existence in that space, it just completely vanishes.
So, we're going to end this explainer with a lingering, pretty provocative thought for you to take away. If you spend years, maybe decades, becoming someone else just to achieve success, whose success is it really? Does it belong to you, or does it just belong to your corporate avatar? It's a really powerful reminder to stop and ask yourself whether the life you're living inside actually belongs to you. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. And hey, I highly encourage you to take a moment today and really reflect on who the passenger is in your own mind.
So picture this. You're walking back from the break room, say on a typical Tuesday afternoon. You've got this mediocre cup of coffee in your hand, right?
Well, yeah, we all know that coffee.
Right. The stuff that barely tastes like coffee. And you're walking, you're thinking about some email you need to send, and you just happen to catch a glimpse of your reflection in the glass door of a conference room.
Uh-huh.
And for a fraction of a heartbeat, you have absolutely no idea who is looking back at you. Like it's just a stranger.
It's a completely jarring experience because in that moment, the brain is experiencing a literal misfire.
A misfire. Like a glitch.
Yeah, exactly like a glitch.
Right.
It totally fails to reconcile the internal map of who you believe you are with the external visual data of the person standing in that fluorescent lit hallway.
Oh, wow. And then the cognitive gears kind of catch up, right? You think, oh, right, that's me.
Right. Snap back.
But in that tiny, suspended moment of non-recognition, we're not just dealing with a simple distraction. We are dealing with a fundamental question of identity.
We really are.
Because the person looking back at you in that glass, wearing those specific clothes, carrying that specific posture, who is that, really? Like, is that your actual inner self? Or is that a highly calibrated character you constructed just to survive the workday?
And that is exactly what we are going to deconstruct today. So welcome to this deep dive. I'm our resident expert today, and we are going to unpack the worldview of YouTuber and thinker Tom Scrilius.
Yes, and I'm your host. We're going to be focusing laser-like on one specific, really unsettling phenomenon from his work, which he calls the psychology of the professional mask.
Right. We'll be looking at what actually happens to the human psyche when we are forced into this relentless daily performance of a corporate character.
And I want to be clear, this isn't just some abstract philosophical exercise about, authenticity.
No, not at all.
We are looking at the biological and the psychological toll of this performance. We're going to examine how it creates a profound identity crisis, how it erodes self-esteem, and ultimately leaves people feeling like non-playable characters.
Like NPCs in their own lives, yeah.
Exactly. NPCs in the background of their own lives. So as we dig into this, I want you, the listener, to really evaluate your own Monday through Friday existence.
Yeah.
How much of the real you actually walks through the office doors and how much is deliberately parked outside?
It's a tough question to ask yourself, but let's start with that moment of non-recognition in the mirror.
Bit of glitch.
Right, the glitch. The source material frames this as the avatar dilemma. When you look in the glass and see a stranger, it's not a vision problem, it's a symptom of a fractured internal ecosystem.
Okay, a fractured ecosystem. How does Scrylius explain that?
So, to understand how that fracture happens, he uses a specific architectural model of the human mind. He divides it into 3 distinct components.
Okay, what
You have the observer, the driver, and the passenger.
Right. And the metaphor used to explain this in the sources is a taxi cab. Right?
Yes, the taxi metaphor. It's perfect. So imagine your physical body, your biological presence in the world is the taxi itself.
Okay, I'm with you.
And inside this taxi, you have 2 very different entities. In the front seat, with their hands gripped tightly on the steering wheel, you have the driver.
And the driver is like the rational brain.
Exactly. The driver represents your active, rational, executive functioning brain. This is the mechanism that calculates risk, generates output, pays the mortgage, and, navigates office politics.
But because the driver is fundamentally obsessed with navigation and survival, it is also the engine of your anxiety, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. It's the part of you that feels intense guilt over missing a deadline. It's the part that generates the relentless pressure to perform, to achieve, to climb the ladder. It is entirely utilitarian.
Okay, so if the driver is up front stressed out, who is in the back?
Right. So sitting in the back seat is the passenger. And in some psychological frameworks, this is known as the observer.
The observer, okay.
The passenger is the core, authentic self. It doesn't calculate or strategize. It simply experiences. It holds your capacity for deep empathy, your unstructured creativity, your natural state of compassion.
So the passenger doesn't care about quarterly metrics or KPIs.
Not even a little bit. The passenger just wants to look out the window, observe the world, and exist in a state of peace.
That sounds really nice, actually. So under ideal conditions, I imagine the driver listens to the passenger, right? Like the passenger says, hey, I want to go to the park. And the driver figures out the route to get there safely.
Exactly. That is a healthy internal ecosystem. But the modern corporate environment completely upends that dynamic.
How so?
Well, the workplace demands such extreme, constant output that the driver is forced to seize total dictatorial control of the taxi.
Wow. Total control.
Yeah, the driver has to completely tune out the passenger just to survive the day. There is no time to look at the park when you have back-to-back Zoom calls.
And this is where that identity fracture begins, right? Because if you spend 40 to 60 hours a week in an environment that solely rewards the hypervigilant, anxious driver.
Your brain begins to adapt to that state as its default setting.
Yes. So you begin to identify exclusively with the driver.
Yeah.
You literally forget you even have a passenger in the back seat.
Exactly. So when you look in that reflective conference room door on a Tuesday, you aren't seeing yourself. You are seeing the avatar that the driver built to survive the office.
But let me pause and kind of interrogate that dynamic for a moment, because I think it's important. Is the driver actually the villain in this scenario?
That's a great question.
Right. Because it's very easy to frame the analytical, stressed-out part of our brain as this malicious jailer holding our true self hostage. But if we look at the economic reality of the Western world, isn't the driver just doing its job?
Yes.
It's like downloading a corporate operating system that overwrites your factory settings. But the driver knows that if we sit in the back seat and daydream, we can't pay rent. The system kind of requires us to suppress the passenger to avoid ruin, doesn't it?
That is a vital distinction, and I'm glad you brought it up. The driver isn't malicious at all. The driver is highly, highly adaptive. It's just trying to keep us from getting fired. Exactly. The tragedy here isn't that the driver is evil. It's that the environmental pressures are so immense that the driver is forced to cannibalize the passenger just to keep the taxi on the road.
Cannibalize the passenger. That is a dark image.
It is, but it's accurate. The system is designed to extract a very specific, reliable, predictable type of output. And a reliable, predictable output does not come from a spontaneous, creatively fulfilled passenger.
Right.
It comes from a terrified driver following a strict, pre-planned route.
And we need to talk about how this isn't just some conceptual philosophical cannibalization. The source material highlights that this suppression literally alters the neurological architecture of the brain.
Yes, the physical brain changes.
There is this fascinating, honestly terrifying story from Scrylius' own life that illustrates this perfectly. It centers around a condition called aphantasia. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. So aphantasia is the inability to voluntarily create mental images in your mind's eye. If you ask most people to close their eyes and picture a red apple, they can generate a visual representation of it. They see the shape, the red hue, maybe a little shadow on the desk.
Right. I can see an apple right now if I close my eyes.
But Scrylius realized, well into his adulthood, that he couldn't do this anymore. When he closed his eyes, he saw nothing but black static. The visualization software in his brain was just simply gone.
That is wild. And what makes this so haunting, according to the deep dive into his work, is that he distinctly remembers not having aphantasia as a child.
Right. He used to be able to visualize perfectly.
He remembers having this rich, vivid visual imagination. He talked about building elaborate Lego structures in his head, drawing, dreaming in full cinematic detail.
Yeah, he had a very active visual cortex. So the obvious question is, what happened to that neural machinery?
Where did it go?
Scrylius maps the disappearance of his inner visual world directly onto his career path. He is categorized as an INTJA on the Myers-Briggs scale.
The architect type, right. The highly analytical one.
Exactly. And he spent 2 solid decades working as a consultant.
Which means spending 20 years staring at spreadsheets.
Yes. Analyzing abstract data sets, building financial forecasts, and operating entirely within a realm of pure utilitarian logic.
Right. So we have to look at the mechanism of neuroplasticity here. The brain is remarkably efficient, isn't it?
Highly efficient. The foundational rule of neuroscience is neurons that fire together wire together.
Right.
But the inverse is also true. Neural pathways that are ignored will eventually be pruned away to conserve energy.
Wow.
So for 20 years, Scrylius existed in a corporate environment that actively discouraged unstructured imagination.
Because the system didn't need him to visualize a red apple.
Exactly. It needed him to optimize a supply chain.
So the brain just adapted to the environment. It looked at the massive energy required to sustain a creative visual cortex and said, hey, we don't use this anymore. We need all available processing power for spreadsheet analysis.
Yes. It physically turned the lights off in the creative wing of his mind to make him more employable. The driver literally rewired the hardware to survive the corporate ecosystem.
Is a profound neurological sacrifice. The system selected against his inner creative self.
It really did. And this brings us to a crucial pivot point in our analysis.
Which is?
If the internal ecosystem is this fragile, if the brain will literally prune away its own imagination to survive, what happens when we place that delicate internal ecosystem into an environment that aggressively demands a very specific, exhausting type of performance?
Okay, this moves us right into the architecture of the modern workplace, and specifically this concept of the extrovert ideal.
Yes. The sources lean heavily on this concept, which was popularized by thinkers like Susan Cain.
Right.
The premise is that the modern office isn't a neutral, objective space. It is a highly calibrated environment built around a mandatory performance of extroversion.
And when you say a mandatory performance, you mean the environment basically equates volume with value.
Yes, volume, speed, visibility. It is culturally designed to reward the person who speaks the loudest in a room, right?
Always.
The person who is the fastest to speak, and those who thrive in open-plan offices. It operates on this flawed assumption that aggressive, vocal brainstorming in a room of 20 people is somehow inherently superior to quiet, solitary contemplation.
Let's ground this in the physical reality of the workplace, because we have to talk about the open-plan office. The source material refers to these spaces as essentially sensory torture chambers for introverts.
Sensory torture chambers.
And we really need to understand the physiological why behind that. Why is an open office so painful for some people?
Well, introverts and extroverts have fundamentally different baseline sensitivities to dopamine and external stimuli. So an open-plan office is an architectural disaster for a nervous system that requires low stimulation for deep focus.
Right, because there's just so much noise.
In an open-plan environment, every single background conversation, every phone ringing 3 desks over, every person walking behind your chair, it triggers a micro-response in the sympathetic nervous system.
So it's like a continuous low-grade drip of cortisol all day long.
Exactly. Your brain is constantly scanning the environment for interruptions, meaning you can never fully sink into a state of deep, relaxed cognitive flow.
But it goes beyond just the physical architecture, doesn't it? It's also about the behavioral mask that introverts are forced to wear.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the daily reality of managing this deficit. You are forced to fake high-energy enthusiasm during mandatory team-building exercises.
Oh, worst.
Right. You have to force an engaged performative smile through a working lunch when what your nervous system is biologically screaming for is just 20 minutes of absolute silence in a dark room to recalibrate.
Yeah, you find yourself rehearsing what you're going to say in a meeting before you've even fully formed the thought.
Yes. Why do we do that?
Because you know that if you take the time to deeply process the idea, which, by the way, is how your brain actually works best, someone with a louder voice and a faster reaction time is going to talk over you and own the moment.
Exactly. You have to aggressively push against your own nature just to be heard.
And the amount of caloric and psychological energy required to sustain that performance is staggering. The source material provides a brilliant contrast to illustrate this exhaustion. Looking at Scrilius' own career history.
The receptionist story.
Yes, he compares his time as a highly paid consultant with a brief temporary stint he did as a receptionist. And this contrast completely flips our societal understanding of labor and fatigue.
It really does. So Scrilius talks about working these prestigious, intellectually demanding consulting jobs. He was making great money, doing high-level strategy. But at the end of the day, he would walk through his front door, collapse onto his couch, and be entirely incapable of moving.
Just totally drained.
He was a husk. He couldn't engage with his family. He couldn't pursue hobbies. His battery was at zero.
Because the cognitive load of doing the work was actually secondary to the massive psychological load of maintaining that extrovert mask all day long.
Right. But then there was the receptionist job.
Right.
Now, society tells us this is a low-level, low-value position. He didn't even put it on his LinkedIn profile because of the cultural shame attached to stepping off the corporate ladder.
But let's look at the mechanics of the job itself. He was responsible for sitting at a desk, maintaining a quiet lobby, and occasionally pressing a button to let people in.
Right. Unlocking the door for visitors. That was the entirety of the scope.
And for those 3 months, the sources say he experienced profound psychological bliss.
Bliss. His nervous system finally shifted from the stressed-out sympathetic state, the fight-or-flight mode of the consultant, into the parasympathetic rest and digest state.
Because he was existing without performing.
Exactly. He was alone for long stretches. There were no aggressive brainstorming scrums, no performative networking, no forced smiles to project synergistic enthusiasm.
He brought books to the desk and read them. He spent hours just looking out the window, letting his mind wander.
He started writing his ideas down in notebooks again.
When he went home at 5, he actually had the energy to make creative videos. He was alive again.
Simply because he was allowed to exist in a space without performing. This contrast allows us to completely reevaluate how we diagnose exhaustion in modern society.
Yeah, that's a huge point. When people say they were burned out, we immediately assume it's a physical fatigue from working too many hours or cognitive fatigue from tasks that are too complex.
Right, but this framework suggests something much deeper. Massive segments of the workforce are experiencing the profound psychological depletion of pretending to be someone else for 40 hours a week.
It's the exhaustion of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
You're managing a deficit that never stops growing. And people try to cure this burnout by, sleeping 10 hours on the weekend.
But sleep only addresses biological tiredness.
Right. It does absolutely nothing to cure the soul-deep weariness of systemic self-betrayal.
That is precisely the mechanism. You wake up exhausted on Monday morning, not because your muscles haven't recovered, but because your subconscious knows you are about to step back into an environment that is fundamentally hostile to your neurological baseline.
But I want to push back on that word again, hostile, because I think it's important to clarify.
Sure.
I'll throw an analogy at you. Let's say you take an elite marathon runner, someone with incredible endurance, and you throw them into an Olympic swimming pool.
Okay.
You tell them they have to compete in the 100-meter butterfly sprint. Obviously, they're going to struggle. They might even start drowning.
Right.
Is the water in the pool hostile and malicious? Or is the environment just completely oblivious to the runner's actual strengths? It's like forcing a marathon runner to compete in a swimming race and then calling them lazy when they drown. We shouldn't call the runner lazy, but we also shouldn't call the pool evil. It's just the wrong element.
I see where you're going with the analogy, but we have to take it one step further to understand the psychological damage.
Okay, lay it on me.
Yes, the water isn't consciously evil. The workplace isn't some cabal of extroverts plotting against introverts in a smoke-filled room.
Right.
But the rules of the swimming pool were written exclusively by swimmers for swimmers. The modern corporate environment was architected by people who thrive on constant vocalization, immediate reaction, and highly visible energy.
Ah, I see. So if you are the marathon runner, built for deep, prolonged focus, careful processing, and quiet endurance, the environment will inevitably suffocate you.
Exactly. And here is where the hostility becomes internalized.
Internalized. How?
Well, the marathon runner doesn't blame the water. The marathon runner looks at everyone else swimming effortlessly and begins to deeply, inherently blame themselves for not having gills.
Oh, wow.
They internalize their struggle as a personal moral failure rather than just an environmental mismatch.
Which brings us to the most devastating consequence of this entire dynamic. The constant performance doesn't just make you tired, it fundamentally destroys your self-esteem.
Yes, it dismantles it systematically.
And the truly twisted part of this mechanism is that it destroys your self-esteem, even, and perhaps especially, when you succeed.
This is one of the most counterintuitive insights in the material. Society operates on the premise that external success cures internal doubt.
Right. If you get the promotion, or secure the raise, or land the impressive title, your confidence should theoretically soar. You have empirical proof of your value.
But what actually happens in the psyche when you earn that success by wearing a mask that isn't yours?
The success feels entirely fraudulent. It feels hollow because your passenger, the real you in the back seat, knows you cheated to get it.
Yes. The material provides a radical redefinition of imposter syndrome.
I love this part.
Normally, the standard psychological definition of imposter syndrome frames it as a cognitive distortion. It's supposed to be an irrational, unfounded fear that you are secretly incompetent and will be exposed, despite a mountain of evidence proving you're capable.
Right. We treat it like a glitch in self-perception that needs to be therapied away. Like, you belong in this room, just believe in yourself.
But Skrylus flips this completely. In the context of the professional mask, imposter syndrome is not an irrational cognitive distortion. It is a highly accurate, entirely rational assessment of the situation.
It's entirely rational because it's your passenger screaming from the back seat. The person they are applauding right now is not me.
Precisely. It is the deep awareness that the avatar receiving the bonus check, the character shaking hands on the stage, is a fabrication.
So every single corporate achievement doesn't build your confidence. It actually reinforces a devastating internal narrative.
It confirms your deepest fear,
which is that your authentic, quiet, unvarnished self has zero market value. You are internalizing the message that you are only worthy of praise and security when you are actively faking it.
You are literally being financially rewarded for your own self-betrayal. And the sources share a very visceral story that encapsulates this feeling. It's the story of the empty promotion.
Tell me about the empty promotion.
So, Skrylus recounts the moment in his career when he landed a major, highly sought-after promotion. This is the exact moment society tells you to pop the champagne.
Right, you've made it.
And outwardly, he plays the role perfectly. He sits in the meeting, he deploys the big extroverted smile, he shakes the hands, he uses all the correct synergistic corporate vocabulary, he performs the exact script of a grateful, ambitious employee.
But then he leaves the office, he goes home, closes his front door, and sits in absolute dead silence in his house for an hour. He describes feeling completely, profoundly empty.
There is no joy, there is no pride.
Because the promotion wasn't awarded to him, it was awarded to the driver.
Right. It was awarded to the avatar. And when the avatar monopolizes all the victories, the true self starves in the darkness. This leads to a terrifying psychological state the material refers to as the bleeding mask.
The bleeding mask.
Right.
This is the phenomenon where the boundary between the performance and reality collapses entirely.
Right.
Yes.
Because you cannot simply take the mask off at 5 p.m. when you leave the building.
Why not? Shouldn't you just be able to switch it off?
You can't, because neuroplasticity works in both directions. If you hold your face in a rigid, performative smile for 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, for a decade, the mask fuses to the bone.
Wow. Fuses to the bone.
The performance begins to bleed out of the corporate environment and infiltrates your personal life. Skrylus notes moments where he would catch himself performing relaxation or projecting an aura of authenticity, even when he was completely alone in his own living room.
He's sitting on his own couch with zero audience, but his nervous system is still holding tension.
Still managing his own image for an invisible crowd.
Completely unable to tell where the corporate mask ends and his original face begins.
It is the ultimate loss of self. You've been reciting a script for so long that you have genuinely forgotten your own native language.
Okay, but wait, I have to interject here, because a very practical listener is going to look at this and say, all right, this sounds like a tragedy of the soul, sure, but let's look at the material reality.
Okay, let's hear it.
If the fake you gets the promotion, the real you still gets to cash the paycheck, right?
True.
The real you gets to sleep in the nicer house, take the vacations, afford high-quality health care, and secure a retirement. Why isn't that material financial security enough to offset the identity crisis? Isn't this just the pragmatic trade-off of being an adult in a capitalist society?
That is the standard rationalizing defense of the system. But we have to look at how cognitive dissonance physically manifests in the body.
Okay.
Financial security achieved through chronic daily self-betrayal creates an unlivable internal war. Yes, the money buys a comfortable mattress, but it cannot buy back the integrity of the nervous system.
As the saying goes, the body keeps the score. You can't out-earn the biological stress of living a lie.
Exactly. The HPA axis, the body's stress response system, doesn't care about your bank balance.
Right.
The cognitive dissonance of spending 80% of your waking hours suppressing your natural instincts triggers chronic cortisol release.
Right.
And this manifests in very real physical pathology.
Like what kind of pathology?
High blood pressure, gastrointestinal issues, chronic insomnia, a frayed immune system. You are literally trading your biological health to fund a comfortable life for an avatar you don't even recognize, while the actual human being inside is suffocating.
So the financial security, no matter how robust, simply becomes the padding inside a gilded cage.
Exactly. It's funding the maintenance of the hologram, not the thriving of the human.
Which leads us directly to the coping mechanisms. Because a human being cannot endure that level of intense daily internal warfare without developing a strategy to mitigate the damage.
Right, you have to survive it somehow.
If you are trapped in a system that demands a fabricated version of you, how do you survive the massive gap between who you actually are and who you must be?
The answer the sources provide is that we develop a habit of selective existence.
Selective existence.
Yes. We deliberately and intentionally shrink our personalities to minimize the surface area that can be attacked or critiqued.
It's self-imposed emotional containment. I mean, we look at the modern communication tools we use, Slack, Teams, Zoom. We've mastered the art of the completely neutral thumbs-up emoji to acknowledge a message we vehemently disagree with.
Oh, the passive-aggressive thumbs up, yes.
Right. We nod thoughtfully on camera while completely dissociating from the conversation.
We suppress our genuine thoughts, and we practice existing only in these highly sanitized fragments to remain safe within the corporate hierarchy. And the sources draw a very sharp, deliberate parallel here to George Orwell's seminal novel, 1984.
The concept of Orwellian self-policing.
Right. From the moment we enter the workforce, ordinary people are taught that staying anonymous, remaining quiet and aggressively neutral, and maintaining a professional demeanor is a sign of wisdom.
But the sources argue this is actually a real-world manifestation of newspeak.
Yes, newspeak. In Orwell's fiction, the authoritarian regime deliberately shrinks the vocabulary of the language in order to shrink the populace's capacity for rebellious thought.
The logic is foolproof. If you physically lack the words to describe freedom, you cannot conceptualize a rebellion. You can't fight for something you can't articulate.
And in the corporate ecosystem, this exact linguistic shrinking happens constantly to manage emotional reactions and suppress dissent. The sources highlight the linguistic shift from the word fired to the word layoff.
Let's dissect the psychology of those two words because it's a brilliant linguistic trick.
It really is.
Fired is a harsh, jagged word. It sounds personal. It implies an event, a conflict, a direct action taken by a boss against a worker. It gives the worker something to push against.
Yeah.
But layoff.
Layoff sounds soft. It sounds gentle, almost passive.
It evokes imagery of someone being carefully set down to rest.
Right. It frames the termination not as a conscious, aggressive decision made by executives to protect their quarterly profit margins, but rather as an inevitable, uncontrollable economic weather pattern. We suffered some layoffs, as if a storm simply blew through the office.
But the material reality for the worker is identical. The income goes to zero, the healthcare evaporates, the family stability is destroyed. Yet one word incites righteous anger and a demand for accountability, while the other word induces passive, sorrowful acceptance.
That is the immense power of shrinking language to manage human behavior. But the most insidious aspect of this control isn't what the management says to the workers. It is what the workers learn to do to themselves.
The self-policing.
Exactly. In 1984, the protagonist Winston Smith keeps a secret diary where he writes down his true, unvarnished thoughts because he has fully internalized the terrifying rules of the regime. He polices his own mind long before the thought police ever have to kick down his door.
And Scrylius confesses to doing the exact same thing in his corporate life.
He does.
He talks about maintaining hidden, private notebooks filled with his actual, genuine thoughts. He wrote down his frustrations, his deep structural critiques of the company's failures, his observations of toxic management. He had all the answers, but those thoughts were deemed too dangerous or too negative to ever say out loud.
Think about the physical reality of the meetings we all sit in every week. Often, the outcomes and decisions have been entirely pre-decided by leadership before anyone even pulls out a chair.
Very true.
A worker sitting at that table might possess a real, valid, mathematically sound criticism that could save the project from failure.
Yeah.
But what do they actually do?
They nod. They maintain a perfectly neutral, pleasant facial expression. They type "great alignment, team" in the chat.
Right, they park their real, capable self out of sight. They become what we could call a meeting room mime.
A meeting room mime. Because speaking up, pointing out the flaws, being the free thinker in that highly regimented space is incredibly dangerous. It makes you a target for being labeled, not a team player.
And this constant self-imposed silencing leads to a procedural erasure of the individual's humanity within the company. The sources share a chilling anecdote about this, referred to as the number 107 story.
Oh, this story perfectly captures the absurdity of corporate dehumanization. So Scrylius is working as a consultant, and he is trying to place a completely mundane internal purchase order for a piece of equipment.
Right, just a normal task.
And in the generic notes field of the digital form, he types the first name of a colleague to clarify who the gear is for. He simply writes, "This order is for Robert." And what is the immediate response?
He is instantly flagged and reprimanded by the HR and Compliance Department for violating GDPR.
The European Data Protection Regulations.
Yeah.
He is reprimanded for using a coworker's first name on an internal private company document. It's insane.
On the surface, the company frames this as a strict ethical adherence to privacy protection. But Scrylius analyzes the deeper psychological impact of this policy.
What does he realize?
He realizes in that moment that, legally and structurally, he is not Tom. He is not a human being. He is merely consultant number 107. When his contract inevitably ends, every single trace of his actual presence, his unique personal contributions, his humor, his real existence within those walls is procedurally and legally scrubbed from the historical record.
You are not a living, breathing human being who spent years of your one wild and precious life pouring energy into that building. You are a sanitized corporate hologram.
A hologram.
You are erased so cleanly, with such bureaucratic efficiency, it's as if you were never born.
And the stark contrast is that the CEO's name remains plastered on every shareholder document, their legacy meticulously preserved in the corporate mythology. But the ordinary worker is shoved directly down Orwell's memory hole.
Yeah.
The genius of the modern system is that it doesn't need chains and it doesn't need physical guards. It only needs you to monitor your own keystrokes, suppress your own name, and quietly accept your own historical erasure as standard operating procedure.
The sources offer an incredibly potent analogy for this exact dynamic. I'd love to share it.
Dude.
It's called the elephant at the dinner party. Imagine you are sitting at an elegant, high society dinner party. There is a massive, literal elephant standing on the mahogany table, violently chewing on the floral centerpiece and knocking over wine glasses.
Wait, the visual.
Right. And yet every single person sitting around the table is politely sipping their water, maintaining eye contact, and discussing what they watched on television last night.
Because the social contract of the room dictates that acknowledging reality is a breach of etiquette.
Exactly. It's like sitting at a dinner party where an elephant is eating the centerpiece, but everyone is politely discussing TV. If you point out the elephant, you become the problem.
Right. If you finally break, if you stand up and shout, "Hey, there is a massive elephant destroying the table," the elephant isn't viewed as the problem. You are.
You are the difficult, maladjusted person ruining the pleasant dinner party with your inappropriate outburst of reality.
That is the perfect encapsulation of the corporate gag order. The system demands total complicity in the illusion. The unspoken rule is that maintaining the comfort of the hierarchy is infinitely more important than acknowledging the truth of the situation.
So let's follow this trajectory to its logical conclusion. If you spend decades sitting at that dinner table, aggressively ignoring the elephant, holding your true thoughts locked away in a hidden notebook, and playing the role of a sanitized, anonymous avatar, what happens?
You eventually lose your grip on reality entirely.
Which brings us to the final and frankly most unsettling destination of this deep dive: emotional dissociation and the phenomenon of the NPC effect.
This is the ultimate terminal stage of the professional mask. It is the terrifying dissociative realization that you feel like a non-playable character, a background extra in a scripted simulation of your own life.
Let's clarify what we mean by renting out your identity, because we aren't just talking about selling your labor or your physical time.
No, that is the critical shift in the modern knowledge economy. In an industrial framework, you sold your physical labor to move a box from point A to point B.
Right.
Your internal emotional state while moving the box was largely irrelevant to the employer. They didn't care if you were sad, as long as the box moved.
But in the modern corporate sphere, you are paid to perform an emotional state.
Yes, you are contractually obligated to perform happiness, to project deep, sycophantic enthusiasm for corporate initiatives that you and every other intelligent person in the room know perfectly well will be abandoned and forgotten in 3 months.
It's the mandatory exclamation points in every email. It's the performative, "Great question, Brad," or "Let's circle back and synergize on that." You are bleeding out your genuine, finite human emotional capacity on absolute trivia.
And this relentless daily emotional labor leads directly to what psychologists call dissociation, or what the sources call the hologram effect.
The hologram effect, where you are physically present but entirely absent in every other meaningful way.
Yes. You are physically sitting in the ergonomic chair at the status meeting, but your consciousness is entirely absent. Scrylius talks about observing this phenomenon in public spaces.
He calls these the out-of-body moments, right?
Yes, the out-of-body moments. He describes stopping mid-commute, looking around at the flow of traffic, the people staring vacantly down at their phones, the rehearsed interactions at the coffee shop, and suddenly seeing the script.
Seeing the script, like seeing the Matrix.
Exactly. He sees the invisible architectural programming that dictates exactly where everyone moves, what meaningless pleasantries they exchange, and how they arrange their faces, and the terrifying, isolating question arises in his mind.
Am I the crazy one, or is everyone else just reading from a script they never chose?
Right. Am I losing my sanity for seeing the Matrix here, or is everyone else just blindly reading from a script they never auditioned for?
It's that chilling state of continuous partial attention. We are all everywhere and nowhere at the same time. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, illustrates the total terrifying surrender to this corporate script, quite like the bicycle accident story from the sources.
Oh, this story. It is a dark one.
It really is. This is the moment where the mask completely overrides baseline human empathy. Let's walk through what happened here.
So it's a defining anecdote that forces us to look at human behavioral psychology. Scrylius details a situation involving a close colleague.
Okay.
This colleague's husband had just been involved in a very severe, highly traumatic bicycle accident. He was hospitalized. It was a genuine crisis.
A real life-altering, terrifying human event that shakes a family to its core.
Yes, and incredibly, shortly after this trauma occurs, the boss of their department mandates a team-building exercise.
A team-building exercise after a tragedy.
Yes. Whether this was born of profound sociopathic obliviousness or just rigid, unfeeling adherence to the pre-planned corporate calendar, the mandate comes down.
Yeah.
And what is this specific team-building exercise chosen?
A mandatory team bicycle trip.
A bicycle trip.
The sheer insensitivity is staggering.
It's beyond belief. And Scrylius describes his own internal monologue in the moment of preparing for this trip. He describes standing there physically strapping a bicycle helmet onto his head, knowing in his bones how deeply inappropriate, cruel, and tone-deaf the entire situation was to his greeting colleague.
But what is his actual action? Does he say no?
He straps on the helmet, he gets on the bike, and he pedals.
He participates. He actively chooses the room's script over his own deeply held moral instinct.
Yes. He prioritizes the performance of being an agreeable team player over the reality of his own eyes and his own human empathy.
You know, this reminds me so much of the Milgram obedience experiments from the 1960s, where ordinary people were willing to administer what they thought were lethal electric shocks to a stranger, simply because an authority figure in a white lab coat told them the experiment required it.
The authority bias.
Exactly. The authority bias completely overrides personal morality. Skrylus knew pedaling that bike was a betrayal of his colleagues' humanity. But the sheer cognitive load of breaking the corporate script, just standing up and saying, no, this is wrong, I won't do it, was too massive to overcome.
That is the NPC effect in its purest, most toxic manifestation. You are literally just executing the programming of the environment, even when that programming is morally repugnant to the passenger trapped in the back seat.
Which forces me to ask the darkest question of this entire deep dive. Is this NPC numbness, this total emotional dissociation, a bug in the corporate system, or is it a feature?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. Does the system actually require us to be slightly hollowed out, perpetually exhausted, and slightly dissociated, precisely so we don't have the energy to start questioning the spreadsheets or refusing to pedal the bicycles?
Well, if we look at the historical context briefly touched upon in the sources, the evolution of labor dynamics from the Enclosures Act, which violently pushed self-sustaining agricultural peasants into the regimented time clocks of industrial factories, all the way to the modern open-plan office, the structural argument leans heavily toward it being a feature.
A feature, not a bug.
Right. Think about it from a purely managerial perspective. A fully actualized, deeply grounded, highly intuitive, well-rested human being is incredibly difficult to manage.
Because they ask why.
Exactly. They push back against meaningless, busy work tasks. They possess the self-worth to prioritize their family's well-being over a 6 p.m. Friday status update.
A completely present, emotionally whole human being is a terrible, highly inefficient wage slave.
Precisely. But a hollowed-out avatar. A terrified driver obsessed with arbitrary metrics and fearful of HR reprimands. A dissociated hologram who has successfully outsourced their own internal moral compass to the company handbook.
That is a highly predictable, easily manipulatable, and immensely profitable resource.
The system doesn't necessarily wake up in the morning maliciously plotting to destroy your soul. It simply optimizes its architecture for maximum compliance, and your human soul is just the friction it has to eliminate to achieve that frictionless efficiency.
Wow. I want to bring this massive theoretical discussion directly back to you, the listener, because this isn't just an abstract sociological critique. Your body knows this is happening to you long before your conscious mind is willing to admit it.
It's a very physical reaction.
Yes. The biological sciences refer to the enteric nervous system, the complex network of neurons in your gastrointestinal tract, often called the second brain. So I want you to think about your own deeply ingrained physical responses to your weekly routine.
What do you feel on Sunday afternoons?
Exactly. Does your stomach mysteriously tighten into a hard, uncomfortable knot on Sunday afternoons around 4 p.m.? The dreaded Sunday scaries. Do your shoulders physically lock up and elevate towards your ears the moment you walk through the glass lobby doors on Monday morning?
That is your physical body, your primal instinct, actively rejecting the script of the environment before your conscious, rationalizing driver has the time to talk you out of it.
Because your mind will frantically deploy logic, right? I need this job, the health benefits are good, the market is tough, I should be grateful to be employed.
But your gut is screaming a much more ancient truth. This environment is hostile to my baseline biological survival.
So we've been on an incredibly deep journey today through Skrylus' worldview. Let's try to synthesize the architecture of this trap.
Okay, let's recap the journey.
We start by ignoring the passenger in our minds, letting the anxious, survival-driven driver take the wheel.
Right. We then force our inherently diverse nervous systems to conform to the extrovert ideal, draining our cognitive and emotional energy to perform a loud, aggressive character.
Then we earn hollow, external successes that perversely destroy our internal self-esteem, confirming our darkest fears that our real, authentic selves are essentially worthless to the market.
And to cope with the cognitive dissonance, we shrink ourselves. We hide our true thoughts in private notebooks, we willingly police our own language, and we passively accept our procedural, bureaucratic erasure from the historical record.
And the terminal stage is that we ultimately end up strapping on bicycle helmets for mandatory corporate fun, feeling like emotionally dissociated NPCs in a pre-written, highly profitable simulation.
It is an undeniably heavy diagnosis of the modern condition.
It's very heavy.
However, identifying the precise psychological architecture of the prison is the absolute prerequisite to finding the exit.
So there is a way out.
Yes. The source material is remarkably clear on the solution. You do not cure this profound dissociation by working harder on your avatar. You don't fix it by getting a better mask. You cure this by finally recognizing the mask for what it actually is.
A temporary survival tool, not your permanent face.
Exactly.
We want to leave you with a final, provocative thought. A challenge inspired by the sources we've unpacked today. You don't need to quit your job tomorrow morning. You don't need to burn your life down, move to the woods, or flip a conference room table in a blaze of glory.
That would be extreme, yeah. But what if, just once this week, you performed one tiny, almost invisible act of internal rebellion?
What if you spoke your actual, unvarnished mind in just one low-stakes meeting where you would normally just nod and type a thumbs-up emoji? What if you simply sat in comfortable silence during a team-building exercise without exhausting yourself performing the mandatory fake enthusiasm?
What if you left your phone in your pocket during your commute, looked out the window, and just let your passenger dictate the view for 20 minutes?
The ultimate freeing realization here is that the door to this psychological cage was never actually locked from the outside. The entire system relies almost exclusively on your own internalized self-policing.
The only thing keeping you trapped inside the simulation is the heavy, exhausting mask you've simply forgotten how to take off.
If you start feeding all of your precious cognitive energy into the performance, even for just 10 minutes a day, you might just start to recognize the actual human being looking back at you in the mirror again. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the script, keep pointing out the elephant in the room, and most importantly, don't let the driver lock your true self in the trunk. We'll see you next time.